I've been a fan of the Legend of Zelda series for a very long time, ever since I downloaded the free Four Swords Anniversary Edition for the Nintendo DSi shop. Who remembers that? We all gotta start somewhere, I suppose. And despite playing and loving almost every game in the series since then, I've barely made any art for it. It's a point of shame for me, personally, because I've done so for Doctor Who, I've done so for Marvel and DC, but not a lot of Zelda. And I think the reason being is because I wanted it to mean something. You know, these games are such big, grand adventures, and it couldn't just be one-off pieces, so I had to dig deep and really do something special, and I think I've found it. Because I've decided, for some reason, probably a lack of sanity, over the next few months or however long it takes, I will be painting every single incarnation of Link from the Legend of Zelda series in my style. Starting with... yeah, sure, why not? I put a lot of thought into exactly how I was going to go about this series, because the Zelda series is home to numerous different art styles, and all of them are incredibly distinct from each other. Like, every game has its own direction, its own identity, and trying to interpret them all through one lens, my lens, is going to be difficult. You see, my style tends towards comic realism. I'm not a stranger to cartoons, but my talent lies in portrait, not anime. And I love rendering, most of all. If anything, rendering is my strong suit, but that presents two problems. Number one, time. These paintings are going to take a long time to make, I can't just knock them out in a day. Number two, there's going to be some heavy reinterpretation involved, because these games were not designed with realism in mind. Maybe you can get away with it with this guy, but this guy? Yeah, no. Luckily, I have a secret weapon called reference material. You see, on the Zelda wiki page for each game in the series, there's a gallery section full of concept art and illustrations from the developers. I'll primarily be using these as my guide, especially for the earlier entries, because as much as I want to use the games themselves as my reference, there's only so much I can do with, well, this. For example, let's take a look at the artwork for the original Legend of Zelda, with these beautiful illustrations from the game's manual as well as the Nintendo Player's Guide. Just look at the detail in these. Whenever you look at these old games, you have to think of the game's graphics as merely the suggestion, and this is what you're supposed to see when you play. It's a type of art that's become more and more obsolete as games have gotten more graphically capable, but seeing this just brings you back to a different time when the pixels used to mean something. They weren't just graphical limitations, they were reinterpretation, they had like artistic merit behind it. It was beautiful. Now, the main reference picture I've chosen isn't from the manual or the Nintendo Player's Guide. It's actually an illustration from an issue of Nintendo Power magazine, which is an old gaming magazine released way back in the day. And the reason I chose this piece was because a lot of the artwork around this game shows Link to be very short and round, like a gnome, which fits the pixel sprite very well, because that's also short and round and square. But from what I can gather, Link is meant to be about 10 or 12 in this game. That, and I really like this pose, it works as the capstone for this iteration really well, and I'll mainly be referencing the yellow band around the cap, the huge hair, the turtleneck and the boots, all these little design elements that make this version of Link distinct from the rest, because, you know, Link doesn't change too much from each iteration in terms of design, so I've got to really focus in on the little details to make them unique. I won't be painting all the items because that is not a precedent I want to set for the rest of the games. If there's a signature item, which, you know, there are for a lot of the games, then I will include them. But for the sake of my sanity, let's just stick with the sword and shield for now. Once I nailed down the design elements for this Link, it's then on to drawing. Simple line art at first, getting ready for fully rendered colour at the painting stage. I wanted to capture the same poses in the reference, but with more realistic proportions, so slightly taller, more even, a young round face, you know, and the same facial expression as well. It's interesting trying to translate anime into realism, especially faces. Like any art style, anime is essentially an exaggeration of real life. They want to pick up the intricacies of the soul, so what do? They make the eyes huge, so you can't help but sink into them. The trick is finding the nuance in that. Anime thrives on simplicity, which works wonders for animation and for other artwork, which has quick turnaround, like manga. They can draw manga so fast because there's so much room for expression and exaggeration, but, you know, for portraiture, you know, with realism involved, you gotta fill in those gaps somehow. I didn't want to make Link too masculine here, partly because he is so young, and partly because he's always been quite androgynous. There's plenty of Peter Pan in this design too, mostly because he was named as a specific inspiration of the character, with the hat and the tunic and the green colour especially. And funnily enough, Peter Pan has a history of being played by women on stage, so it's just a continuation in that theme of androgyny. Not only that, but I think, a lot of people would identify with Link's androgyny. I don't want to take that away from them specifically, especially because gaming is so dominated by either sort of hyper-feminine or hyper-masculine characters, that having a character with specifically androgyny and gender fluidity as like one of their main traits, that's special to me, and I'm going to be reinforcing that for this one. This is where the features of my interpretation of Link will be set down. This is the foundation, so I've got to make it clear that this is something I recognise, and it's something that I want to elaborate on. So now we're deep into painting, let's just take a minute to talk about the game itself. I finished my first proper playthrough in the week before Tears of the Kingdom release, because yes, I was that desperate for Zelda games to play, but I actually really enjoyed it. Do note, I played it with a map and a guide where I needed it, and that's how I recommend you do it too, because that's how you're supposed to play the game. Back then, it was expected that you would have the manual in your hand when you were playing, like you would a board game. If they had the memory space to put a tutorial in there, they absolutely would have. Fun fact, this is one of the first games ever, it might even be the first game ever, to let players save their progress. On the original Japanese release, it was using rewritable discs. Because it was the Famicom, the family computer system. It was literally a computer, they used floppy disk. But in the international releases, we used cartridges, and in the cartridge, there was a battery-powered RAM, which means you could store information in the cartridge itself. Of course, back then, barely any games used save files. It was mainly passwords that, once typed in, would load the game back up where you were, or they just didn't save. As in, you had to finish the game in one go, or, if you wanted to walk away, keep the console running. God damn the magic of 8-bit gaming. But having save files essentially meant that the player could go anywhere and do things in any order, and the game would accommodate that by simply storing the information. And that was very important because this game had a huge amount of freedom. Like, you could just skip over the first dungeon and go to the second one if you were so inclined. Hell, you can get to the first, second, or third dungeons without needing any items. Like, they're literally called level 1, 2, and 3, but nope, you don't have to do level 1. You can just skip straight to level 2 if you want. Crazy stuff. Oh, speaking of skipping things, let's get back to the painting, because I'm sure you can tell, but I was pretty new to Procreate when I started this piece. The tones are slightly off, but my process was mainly just about getting the proper shapes and values for each block of colour, and then going in and tweaking it when needs be. And sometimes I just repaint a section over and over and over again until it just works. More often, painting for me is less about trying to accurately describe what it's supposed to be, and more about finding what looks nice, because ultimately every detail is supposed to contribute to a whole. I think the beauty of painting is describing shapes that people recognise, but using it to communicate something else. It's not real, it's not a photograph, but it's clear. Not real, but clear, most of all. Right, and now we're coming to the end of the painting, which means some final adjustments and tweaks. The thing I like to do is use a layer of colour, set it to overlay, and just let it bring the colour palette together a bit more, sort of unite it in a warmer or a colder colour overall. Another trick that you might have spotted earlier is using a grey saturation layer to take out all of the colour, and this just helps me focus on tonal values, light and dark, highlights and shadows. And in this instance, I needed to take those browns in his jumper and his hair and his boots all the way down so that the green and the skin tones can really pop out more. And then the final touch is finishing the sword and the shield. I love rendering metal. It's just something I'm just good at it. I don't know how. Probably practice. Right, so finishing all that and then filling in the background, and yeah, this piece is pretty much done. Here's the final picture. A pretty good start to the series, if I do say so myself. If you've been following my Instagram, you already know we're past Zelda 2. and I'm currently working on A Link to the Past right now, so if you want to see that piece as soon as it comes out, then you gotta go follow my Instagram, baby, Ted Curtis Art. I will be doing another of these time-lapse videos in retrospective for the next piece, so get ready for my opinions on Zelda 2, a game I've barely played. Hope you're looking forward to that. Until then, have a good life.